but it's a mocked up invoice for Reliable, right? And all we're trying to show you here is, really goes into the accounting side of things, for those of you who have to account for your stuff, right? So what we're saying here is this liquid or allied or basically something else, right? So if we were going to go down, I don't have that slide finished, but if you look at this page 15, okay, and you go down it, because I've got the answers right here, okay? So it's liquid, 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 right? All that stuff is liquid all the way down to the maroon scuff pad, right? And then it's allied all the way down to the 55-gallon thinner, which the thinner is obviously liquid. The metal glaze is allied. What about pinstripe? What's pinstripe? But where should it go on your accounting side of things? It's a part, technically. You could sub it, if you sub it. So the actual tape itself, right, if you're going to buy the tape yourself and bill it yourself, it's a part, okay? If you're going to sub the whole thing out to a sublet guy who's going to come in with his or her own tape and bill you for the tape or labor, then it becomes a sublet. What it's not is a paint material, right? But shockingly, like people who do their own pinstriping, when I look at their invoices, it gets lumped into there, right? Like if you buy pinstriping, all of a sudden you look at people's invoices like poor old Joe here at Reliable, and he's got the pinstripe in there, right? Okay. So again, that doesn't change your bottom line, right? Like I can shift these places all into the right buckets, and at the end of the day, your net's still going to be the same, right? So a lot of times when I start talking about a proper accounting, business owners are like, well, that ain't going to change my checking account, right? That's true, right? But what it does do is it allows you to manage your business by the number as opposed to just by a gut shot or, by your hip, right? Or by feel, right? Which I'm not saying you get rid of that either. I mean, we all, you got to manage your shop by the people, but you also got to look at the numbers, right? And if you're not accounting for it properly, now you're looking at bunk numbers, and you're probably going to go focus your time on something that you may or may not need to, right? So the pinstripes, parts, the final wipes, the seam sealers, the panel bond, the 18-inch paper, that's all allied. That respirator is a shop supply, okay? Respirators are a shop supply. The detail compound is still allied. Welding gas is a shop supply, okay? And then the last three, the hose, the sander, the solder rebuild kit, and the booth bulbs are actually small tools, technically. You could put the booth bulbs into a shop supply scenario. Again, not going to change your bottom line, but you definitely don't want them against your paint material account because it's going to skew your look at your paint material profitability. Make sense to everybody? Okay, so we flip pages, okay? So with our help, Joe's beginning to understand that he has no accounting background. No, that doesn't say that. That some of the items he buys from his paint vendor and sells on his estimates are not paint materials at all. And he has now been able to determine that out of the first material sales figure of $7,500, he missed $500 in additional sales, right? Could be the pinstripe, could be steam sealer, all kinds of things that you can sell as a part, quite honestly, right? Or just sales in general for material or whatever. So just in this example, right, we're saying that he picked up $500 in sales. He also determined that only $5,000 is truly paint material cost. So now we've got material sales of $8K and a material cost of $5K. And if we're on page 16, if you break that down, sales 8 minus cost of $5K divided by our sales of $8K, now we're at a 37.5% gross profit, right? Now we didn't do anything, again, we didn't change your bottom line, and it's not going to make you feel any better when you go put money in the bank later, right? But we are now looking at it from a more clearer view. And instead of saying, shit, my material's at 20%, what the hell is going on? Well, at 37.5, old Joe's now hitting the industry average, right? Which still isn't good enough because you should be better than the industry average, right? Because you're taking time to come sit through a class. Most shops don't even do that, right? So we should be able to beat that. So we talked about that, on which of the invoices were considered shop supplies, welding gas, respirators, and which were small tools, the sander, the hose couplers, all those kind of things, right? All right, so now that Joe understands, now I flipped to page 17, now that Joe understands how to further break down his true material cost, he's come up with the following. So paint department materials 4K, body materials are 1K, his shop supplies are $300, tools 500, parts 200. Now let's calculate it. So now if we're at 8K in sales minus the 4K in cost, we're at a 50% GP when he's accounting for it properly. Make sense to everybody? Again, that's more of just a, how to account for it. Unfortunately, there is no real cut and dry way that our industry actually looks at paint material, right? This is a pretty common breakdown in your book of what falls under body, what falls under liquid and allied, detail, tools and equipment, and parts that we see a lot of, right? The real quandary, or whatever you want to say, comes into play with allied products, right? So, and this is really hard to break out on your invoices, but the rule of thumb is this, okay? Anything over 220 grit, right? So 220 and up, that's really a paint material supply, because it's being used in the paint department, right? They're using 220 and up, 500 grit, 1,000 grit, whatever the hell they do. The rest of it's all really shop supplies, because you're not going to get paid for it. Does that make sense to everybody? So unless we start billing for body shop allied, which there are some places in the country that are starting to do that, by the way, that's how that falls. So does that make sense? So you can refer back to this. I have some other examples. They're all fairly close. This one doesn't really break down the grit. I've got another one that when you look at sandpaper, it busts it out. Like half of it goes to paint, half of it goes to body. Does that make sense? That's not that easy to do. What I would say to like you, for example, is just make sure you account for that the same way every single month, no matter what, right? So when you're looking at your numbers, you know, right, that all the sandpaper's going in this account, so I know why my number is my number. Does that make sense to everybody? Because it's kind of hard to bust that out by grit, right? But in a perfect world, if you look at insurance industry and how they tell you this is all encompassed into your paint material with this crappy math calculation that we use, whatever it is, 32 an hour times whatever hours you have, they will tell you all of that stuff is all part of paint of material, right? So, which isn't right, but we keep putting up with it, right? But we'll talk about some ways where we can overcome them a little bit too, and I see that starting to change some as well, right? So KPIs, paint material key performance indicators. So there's several type of ratios that can help you identify paint material issues. We'll talk about them all real quick. Material sales ratio, material cost ratio. Those are probably two that I use more than anything else. Allied materials purchase is a percent of total paint material. Paint material cost per production employee. Average paint material sales per refinish hour, which is a good number to look at. And allied cost as a percent to sale. What we are saying here is what does this scoreboard tell us, right? And who needs to know the score? What I'll tell you, I'm trying to do this in a good way. I can't tell you who to share your numbers with, right, at your store. What I will tell you is that if you want to move a number at your store, share it, okay? Your people will help you move that number if you tell them that it's important to you and you give them a path to move that number. You see what I mean? So on page 20 it says, who in your team should know the score? Well, I've got paint team, estimators, body techs, vendors, the owner, right? To me, all those people should know the score. Now, I'm not saying we need to bust our net out and put it on a scoreboard for people, right? But them knowing your paint material gross profit and know that our goal is 40 and we're only at 32, right? That's a good thing, you know? So And look, we're talking about paint material profitability. If cycle time is something that you want to move, right? Letting your team know that we're tracking cycle time and that we're a day and a half slower than what we need to be. Shockingly, most people are competitive. There are people out there that don't mind losing, but most people don't like to lose. So if you make it into a scoreboard thing, right, which I've got shops that do that, that'll actually put on a scoreboard what Johnny's hours produced per day per vehicle is, right, versus all the other techs, and then it becomes a little bit of a competition, right, in-house. Maybe you stiff them on that, right? I don't know. But anyway, something to think about. So managers often use material sales as a percent to sale to analyze profitability. So that quick ratio is just as it looks. You've got material sales divided by your gross sales will give your material sales ratio. So an example would be if we had 27,000 in material sales and gross sales of 300K, that'd give us a 9% material sales as a percent to sale. The average or the target is 10%. So we talked about that already earlier in the class. Somewhere between 9 and 11%, that's where your shop needs to be. If you're under that, you're not selling enough material. Does that make sense? Right? So it's just a good indicator of where you're sitting on sales, right? This is office KPIs, right? As I told you, I'm guilty of trying to, spend too much time focusing in the shop to move this number. This number is what's happening in my office, right? Am I accepting caps? Am I accepting partial refinish? Am I not getting enough refinish, labor on there to move that number up? All those things, right? Yeah. You guys still fight spot within panel or partial refinish?
Yeah, reductions all the time.
Yeah.
Doing a whole panel.
Yeah, so I don't know if y'all have seen this or not, because that's the other advantage I have is I'm not running a shop anymore, so I get to stay on top of all this stuff. So, CCC was the one who came out with the time study way back in the day where they pulled this arbitrary 19% of the time that you spend painting a car is spent putting down the base, right? Just so y'all know, if you Google refinish time study Auto Explorer, they've done a time study in 2015, which is much more current, where that number is only 9%. So in other words, when your painter goes in to paint a car, right, and you break down all the steps that they're doing, okay, of the time to bag and tape and tack and all the crap painters do, right, to paint a car and lay down the base and clear it, of that 100% of the time, 9% of that time is what he or she spends putting base down, okay? So when they come into you and they say, we're going to cut this time in half, right? Look at it as a percentage. So there's 3 hours on this door, right? And they want to come in and cut that door down to an hour and a half. Have them, show them, quite honestly, either time study would help you. CCC's time study and Auto Explorer say 19 and 9%, right? Even if you agree at 15%, right? What's 15% of 300? Or 3 hours? It's what, 0.3? It's like 0.5, right? Ish, somewhere in there. So, but you get my point. If you use 10% of a number, because I can do that math in my head, that's easy, right? We've got 3 hours of panel. That's a 0.3 reduction, okay? That right now they're probably asking you to take an hour off of that. So again, I'm not telling you to go in there and, well, first of all, you should not have a concession on a repaired panel. There's a whole argument to be had there, right? But if you are going to allow a concession, at least use the information that's out there to say, okay, Johnny at Geico, I'm going to concede the fact that I'm going to, give a little partial refinish here, but we're going to apply some math to this, not just you arbitrarily deciding that half of the time is gone. Because I have 2 time studies that say it's either 20% or 10%. So how about we meet in the middle at 15%, right? If you want to. I honestly just tell them that Auto Explorer is the most current time study. It's the more accurate time study. It's 8.9%. That's the number I'm going to use. So let's take 9% off of whatever the total is, and I'll concede that 2/10 to you. You see what I mean? So, just don't let them, you know, hit you for half the damn paint time, which is, I see that all the time in stores, right? Okay, so that will affect your material sales as a percent to sale. Make sense to everybody, right? So on the flip side of the ratio is cost, right? So to analyze the cost, it's the material cost divided by gross sales will give you material cost ratio. So the example we used was if you had material cost of $17K at that same 300,000 shop, that gives us a total of 5.7% of total sales. The target for expense to sale is between 5 and 6%, right? So if your shop, if you can, and this is a quickie little thing any of y'all can do at your store, right? Easy numbers to get to, right? Total sales, total cost, and he's at 5.7%. Now if I'm at 5.7% as material cost as a percent to sale, should I go spend my time out in the shop cracking the whip if my material GP isn't where I want it to be? The target's between 5 and 6, so I'm probably spending my week